Where the Sidewalk Ends is a 1974 children's poetry collection written and illustrated by Shel Silverstein. It was published by Harper & Row Publishers. The book's poems address many common childhood concerns and also present purely fanciful stories. Based on a 2007 online poll, the National Education Association named the book one of its teachers' top 100 books for children. A 30th anniversary edition of the book appeared in 2004, and two audio editions, 1983 and 2000, are also available. The collection contains a series of poems, including the title poem, Where the Sidewalk Ends, as well as illustrations. The author dedicated this book for Ursula, and gives thanks to Ursula Nordstrom, Barbara Borack, Khadija Cooper, Dorothy Hagen, Barry Greenwald, Gloria Bressler, and Bill Cole. In 2004, a special 30th anniversary edition was published, which included 12 new poems. The following titles are found only in the 30th anniversary edition. The audio edition of the book was originally released as an album in 1983, which won the 1984 Grammy Award for Best Recording for Children. The collection is recited, sung, and shouted by Shel Silverstein himself and produced by Ron Hafkin. Released on Columbia CBS Records. He also performed it at the 1984 Grammy Awards. The following poems can be heard on the album. Side to Side. B. Silverstein, Shel. Where the Sidewalk Ends. 30. New York. Scholastic. 2005. 1-187. Recorded at Bullet Recording, Nashville. Blank Tapes, New York. And in Studio D at Criteria Recording in Miami, Florida. In 2000. The album was re-released on cassette and CD for the 25th anniversary of the book. This collection is copyrighted 1984 and 2000 by Sony Music Entertainment Inc. The collection is again recited, sung, and shouted by Shel Silverstein. The 25th anniversary edition also contains 11 previously unreleased tracks culled from the original master tapes. They are as follows. Charlotte's Web is a children's novel by American author E. B. White and illustrated by Garth Williams. It was published on October 15, 1952, by Harper & Brothers. The novel tells the story of a livestock pig named Wilbur and his friendship with a barn spider named Charlotte. When Wilbur is in danger of being slaughtered by the farmer, Charlotte writes messages praising Wilbur, such as "some pig," in her web in order to persuade the farmer to let him live, written in White's dry, low-key manner. Charlotte's Web is considered a classic of children's literature, enjoyable to adults as well as children. The description of the experience of swinging on a rope swing at the farm is an often cited example of rhythm in writing, as the pace of the sentences reflects the motion of the swing. In 2000, Publishers Weekly listed the book as the best-selling children's paperback of all time. Charlotte's Web was adapted into an animated feature by Hanna-Barbera Productions and Sagittarius Productions. In 1973, Paramount released a direct-to-video sequel, Charlotte's Web 2, Wilbur's Great Adventure. In the U.S. in 2003, Universal released the film internationally. A live-action film version of E. B. White's original story was released in 2006. A video game based on this adaptation was also released in 2006, after a little girl named Fern Arable pleads for the life of the runt of a litter of piglets. One spring morning, her father gives her the pig to nurture, and she names him Wilbur. She treats him as a pet. But a month later, no longer small, Wilbur is sold to Fern's uncle, Homer Zuckerman. In Zuckerman's barnyard, Wilbur yearns for companionship but is snubbed by the other animals. He is befriended by a barn spider named Charlotte, whose web sits in a doorway overlooking Wilbur's enclosure. When Wilbur discovers that he is being raised for slaughter, she promises to hatch a plan guaranteed to spare his life. Fern often sits on a stool, listening to the animals' conversation. But over the course of the story, As she starts to mature, she begins to find other interests. As the summer passes, Charlotte ponders the question of how to save Wilbur. At last, she comes up with a plan, which she proceeds to implement. Reasoning that Zuckerman would not kill a famous pig, Charlotte weaves words or short phrases in praise of Wilbur into her web, making the barn and pig a tourist attraction, with the web believed to be a miracle. At the county fair, to which he is accompanied by Charlotte and the rat Templeton, Wilbur fails to win the blue ribbon, but is awarded a special prize by the judges. Charlotte, by then dying, his barn spiders due in the fall, hears the presentation over the public address system and knows that the prize means Zuckerman will cherish Wilbur for as long as the pig lives, and will never slaughter him for his meat. She does not return to the farm with Wilbur and Templeton, remaining at the fairgrounds to die, but allows Wilbur to take with him her egg sac, from which her children will hatch in the spring. Wilbur waits out the winter, a winter he would not have survived but for Charlotte. Delighted when the tiny spiders hatch, he is devastated when most leave the barn. 3 remain to take up residence in Charlotte's old doorway. Pleased at finding new friends, Wilbur names one of them Nellie, while the remaining 2 name themselves Joy and Urania. Further generations of spiders keep him company in subsequent years. Death is a major theme scene throughout Charlotte's Web and is brought forth by that of the spider. Charlotte's Web. According to Norton D. Kinghorn, Charlotte's Web acts as a barrier that separates 2 worlds. These worlds are that of life and death. Scholar Amy Rittell says that through Charlotte's continual killing and eating of flies throughout the novel, White makes the concept of death normal for Wilbur and for the readers. Neither Wilbur nor the rat Templeton see death as a part of their lives. Templeton sees it only as something that will happen at some time in the distant future, while Wilbur views it as the end of everything. Wilbur constantly has death on his mind at night, when he is worrying over whether or not he will be slaughtered. Even though Wilbur is able to escape his death, Charlotte, the spider who takes care of Wilbur, is not able to escape her own death. Charlotte passes away, but according to Trudell H. Thomas, yet even in the face of death, life continues and ultimate goodness wins out. Jordan Ann Devereaux explains that E.B. White discusses a few realities of death. From the novel, readers learn that death can be delayed, but it cannot be avoided forever. For Norton D. Kinghorn, Charlotte's Web also acts as a signifier of change. The change Kinghorn refers to is that of both the human world and the barn world. For both of these worlds, change is something that cannot be avoided. Along with the changing of the seasons throughout the novel, the characters also go through their own changes. Jordan Ann Devereaux also explains that Wilbur and Fern each go through their changes to transition from childhood closer to adulthood throughout the novel. This is evidenced by Wilbur accepting death and Fern giving up her dolls. Wilbur grows throughout the novel, allowing him to become the caretaker of Charlotte's children just as she was a caretaker for him, as is explained by scholar Sue Micheff. But rather than accept the changes that are forced upon them, according to Sophie Mills, the characters aim to go beyond the limits of change. In a different way, Wilbur goes through a change when he switches locations. Amy Rittell explains that when he moves from Fern's house to Homer Zuckerman's farm, Wilbur goes from being a loved pet to a farm animal. Fern, the little girl in the novel, goes from being a child to being more of an adult. As she goes through this change, Kinghorn notes that it can also be considered a fall from innocence. Wilbur also starts out young and innocent at the beginning of the novel. A comparison is drawn between the innocence and youth of Fern and Wilbur. Sophie Mills states that the 2 characters can identify with one another. Both Wilbur and Fern are, at first, horrified by the realization that life must end. However, by the end of the novel, both characters learn to accept that everything must die. According to Matthew Scully, the novel presents the difference in the worldview of adults versus the worldview of children. Children, such as Fern, believe killing another for food is wrong, while adults have learned to justify this action. Charlotte's Web was published 3 years after White began writing it. White's editor Ursula Nordstrom said that one day in 1952, E.B. White arrived at her office and handed her a new manuscript, the only copy of Charlotte's Web then in existence, which she read soon after and enjoyed. Since White published Death of a Pig in 1948, an account of his own failure to save a sick pig, bought for butchering, Charlotte's Web can be seen as White's attempt to save his pig in retrospect. White's overall motivation for the book has not been revealed, and he has written, "I haven't told why I wrote the book, but I haven't told you why I sneeze either." A book is a sneeze. When White met the spider who originally inspired Charlotte, he called her Charlotte Apera, after Apera sclopataria, the gray cross spider, now known as Lirynioides sclopatarius, before discovering that the more modern name for that genus was Araenia. In the novel, Charlotte gives her full name as Charlotte A. Cavatica, revealing her as a barn spider, an orb weaver with the scientific name Araneus cavaticus. The arachnid anatomical terms mentioned in the beginning of Chapter 9, and other information that White used, came mostly from American Spiders by Willis J. Gurch and The Spider Book by John Henry Comstock, both of which combine a sense of poetry with scientific fact. White incorporated details from Comstock's accounts of baby spiders, most notably the flight of the young spiders on silken parachutes. White sent Gurch's book to illustrator Garth Williams. Williams' initial drawings depicted a spider with a woman's face, and White suggested that he simply draw a realistic spider instead. White originally opened the novel with an introduction of Wilbur in the barnyard, which later became the third chapter, but decided to begin the novel by introducing Fern and her family on the first page. White's publishers were at one point concerned with the book's ending and tried to get White to change it. Charlotte's Web has become White's most famous book, but White treasured his privacy and that of the farmyard and barn that helped inspire the novel, which have been kept off limits to the public according to his wishes. Charlotte's Web was generally well reviewed when it was released. In the New York Times, Eudora Welty wrote, "As a piece of work, it is just about perfect, and just about magical in the way it is done, aside from its paperback sales." Charlotte's Web is 78th on the all-time best-selling hardback book list according to Publicity for the 2006 film adaptation. See below. The book has sold more than 45 million copies and been translated into 23 languages. It was a Newbery Honor Book for 1953, losing to Secret of the Andes by Anne Nolan Clark for the medal. In 1970, White won the Laura Ingalls Wilder Medal, a major prize in the field of children's literature, for Charlotte's Web, along with his first children's book, Stuart Little, published in 1945. Seth Lear, in his book Children's Literature, finds that Charlotte represents female authorship and creativity, and compares her to other female characters in children's literature such as Jo March in Little Women and Mary Lennox in The Secret Garden. Nancy Larrick brings to attention the startling note of realism in the opening line, "Where's Papa going with that axe?" Illustrator Henry Cole expressed his deep childhood appreciation of the characters and story, and calls Garth Williams' illustrations full of sensitivity, warmth, humor, and intelligence. Illustrator Diana Kane Blethenthal states that Williams' illustrations inspired and influenced her. There's an unabridged audiobook read by White himself which reappeared decades after it had originally been recorded. Newsweek writes that White reads the story without artifice and with a mellow charm, and that White also has a plangency that will make you weep. So don't listen. At least, not to the sad parts. While driving, Joe Burke, president of Pathway Sound, had recorded Charlotte's Web with White in White's neighbor's house in Maine, which Burke describes as an especially memorable experience. and released the book in LP. Bantam released Charlotte's Web alongside Stuart Little on CD in 1991. Digitally remastered, having acquired the two of them for rather a large amount. In 2005, a schoolteacher in California conceived of a project for her class in which they would send out hundreds of drawings of spiders, each representing Charlotte's child Urania going out into the world so that she can return and tell Wilbur of what she has seen, with accompanying letters. They ended up visiting a large number of parks, monuments, and museums, and were hosted by and/or prompted responses from celebrities and politicians such as John Travolta and then First Lady Laura Bush. In 2003, Charlotte's Web was listed at number 170 on the BBC's The Big Read poll of the UK's 200 best-loved novels. A 2004 study found that Charlotte's Web was a common read aloud book for third graders in schools in San Diego County, California, based on a 2007 online poll. The National Education Association named the book one of its teachers' top 100 books for children. It was one of the top 100 chapter books of all time in a 2012 poll by School Library Journal. Its awards and nominations include: the book was adapted into an animated feature of the same name in 1973 by Hanna-Barbera Productions and Sagittarius Productions, with a score by the Sherman Brothers. In 2003, a direct-to-video sequel of that film, Charlotte's Web 2, Wilbur's Great Adventure, was released by Paramount Pictures. In 2006, Paramount Pictures, with Walden Media, Kerner Entertainment Company, and Nickelodeon Movies, produced a live-action, animated adaptation starring Dakota Fanning as Fern and the voice of Julia Roberts as Charlotte. Released on December 15, 2006, a musical production was created with music and lyrics by Charles Strauss. A video game of the 2006 film was developed by Backbone Entertainment and published by THQ and Sega, and released on December 12, 2006, for the Game Boy Advance, Nintendo DS, PlayStation 2 and PC. The Giving Tree is a children's picture book written and illustrated by Shel Silverstein. First published in 1964 by Harper & Row, it has become one of Silverstein's best-known titles and has been translated into numerous languages. This book has been described as one of the most divisive books in children's literature. The controversy concerns whether the relationship between the main characters, a boy and a tree, should be interpreted as positive, i.e., the tree gives the boy selfless love, or as negative, i.e., the boy and the tree have an abusive relationship. Silverstein had difficulty finding a publisher for The Giving Tree. An editor at Simon & Schuster rejected the book's manuscript because he felt that it was too sad for children and too simple for adults. Tommy Ungerer encouraged Silverstein to approach Ursula Nordstrom, who was a publisher with Harper & Row. An editor with Harper & Row stated that Silverstein had made the original illustrations scratchy, like his cartoons for Playboy, but that he later reworked the art in a more pared-down and much sweeter style. The final black-and-white drawings have been described as unadorned visual minimalism. Harper & Row published a small first edition of the book, consisting of only 5,000 to 7,500 copies. In 1964, the book follows the lives of a female apple tree and a boy who develop a relationship with one another. The tree is very giving, and the boy evolves into a taking teenager man, then elderly man. Despite the fact that the boy ages in the story, the tree addresses the boy as boy his entire life. In his childhood, the boy enjoys playing with the tree, climbing her trunk, swinging from her branches, carving me+T tree into the bark, and eating her apples. However, as the boy grows older, he spends less time with the tree and tends to visit her only when he wants material items at various stages of his life, or not coming to the tree alone. such as bringing a lady friend to the tree and carving me plus YL, her initials, into the tree, in an effort to make the boy happy at each of these stages. The tree gives him parts of herself, which he can transform into material items, such as money, from her apples, a house, from her branches, and a boat, from her trunk. With every stage of giving, the tree was happy. In the final pages, both the tree and the boy feel the sting of their respective giving and taking nature. When only a stump remains for the tree, including the carving me plus T, she is not happy, at least at that moment. The boy does return as a tired elderly man to meet the tree once more. She tells him she is sad because she cannot provide him shade, apples, or any materials like in the past. He ignores this and states that all he wants is a quiet place to sit and rest, which the tree, who is weak being just a stump, could provide. With this final stage of giving, the tree was happy. Interest in the book increased by word of mouth. For example, in churches, it was hailed as a parable on the joys of giving. As of 2001, over 5 million copies of the book had been sold, placing it 14th on a list of hardcover, all-time best-selling children's books from Publishers Weekly. By 2011, 8.5 million copies of the book had been sold. In a 1999-2000 National Education Association online survey of children, among the kids' top 100 books, the book was 24th. Based on a 2007 online Teachers' Top 100 Books for Children poll by the National Education Association, the book came in third. It was 85th of the top 100 picture books of all time in a 2012 poll by School Library Journal. Scholastic Parent and Child magazine placed it number 9 on its list of 100 greatest books for kids in 2012. As of 2013, it ranked third on a Goodreads list of best children's books. The book has generated various opinions on how to interpret the relationship between the tree and the boy. Some possible interpretations include: Ursula Nordstrom attributed the book's success partially to Protestant ministers and Sunday school teachers, who believed that the tree represents the Christian ideal of unconditional love. Some people believe that the tree represents Mother Nature and the boy represents humanity. The book has been used to teach children environmental ethics. An educational resource for children describes the book as an allegory about the responsibilities a human being has for living organisms in the environment. Lisa Rowe Frostino states that some curricula use the book as a what not to do role model. One writer believes that the relationship between the boy and the tree is one of friendship. As such, the book teaches children, as your life becomes polluted with the trappings of the modern world, as you grow up, your relationships tend to suffer if you let them fall to the wayside. Another writer's criticism of this interpretation is that the tree appears to be an adult when the boy is young, and cross-generational friendships are rare. A common interpretation of the book is that the tree and the boy have a parent-child relationship, as in a 1995 collection of essays about the book edited by Richard John Newhouse in the journal First Things. Among the essayists, some were positive about the relationship. For example, Amy A. Cass wrote about the story that it is wise and it is true about giving and about motherhood, and her husband Leon R. Cass encourages people to read the book because the tree is an emblem of the sacred memory of our own mother's love. Other essayists put forth negative views. Marianne Glendon wrote that the book is a nursery tale for the me generation, a primer of narcissism, a catechism of exploitation, and Jean Bethke Elshtain felt that the story ends with the tree and the boy, both wrecks. A 1998 study using phenomenographic methods found that Swedish children and mothers tended to interpret the book as dealing with friendship, while Japanese mothers tended to interpret the book as dealing with parent-child relationships. Some authors believe that the book is not actually intended for children, but instead should be treated as a satire aimed at adults along the lines of A Modest Proposal by Jonathan Swift. Elizabeth Bird, writing for the School Library Journal, described The Giving Tree as one of the most divisive books in children's literature. Criticism revolves about the depiction of the relationship between the boy and the tree, totally self-effacing. The mother treats her son as if he were a perpetual infant, while he behaves toward her as if he were frozen in time as an importunate baby. This overrated picture book thus presents as a paradigm for young children a callously exploitative human relationship, both across genders and across generations. It perpetuates the myth of the selfless, all-giving mother who exists only to be used in the image of a male child who can offer no reciprocity, express no gratitude, feel no empathy, an insatiable creature who encounters no limits for his demands. Critics of the book say that the boy never thanks the tree for its gifts. In an interview with Hornbook magazine, Phyllis J. Fogelman, an editor with Harper & Row, said the book is about a sadomasochistic relationship and elevates masochism to the level of a good, which mirrors Mary Daly's analysis in GYN Ecology, The Metaethics of Radical Feminism. Year 1 college instructor discovered that the book caused both male and female remedial reading students to be angry because they felt that the boy exploited the tree for teaching purposes. He paired the book with a short story by Andre Dubus entitled The Fat Girl because its plot can be described as The Giving Tree in reverse. The photograph of Silverstein on the back cover of the book has attracted attention. One writer described the photograph as showing the author's jagged, menacing teeth and evil, glaring eyes. Another writer compared the photograph to the one on the back of Where the Sidewalk Ends, in which Silverstein resembles the Satanist Anton LaVey in the book Diary of a Wimpy Kid. The last straw. The father threatens the protagonist with the photograph to make sure that he does not leave his room at night. A short animated film of the book, produced in 1973, featured Silverstein's narration. Silverstein also wrote a song of the same name, which was performed by Bobby Bare and his family on his album Singin' in the Kitchen. 1974. Silverstein created an adult version of the story in a cartoon entitled I Accept the Challenge. In the cartoon, a nude woman cuts off the nude man's arms and legs with scissors, then sits on his torso in a pose similar to the final drawing in The Giving Tree, in which the old man sits on the stump. Jackson and Dell, 1979, wrote an alternative version of the story for teaching purposes that was entitled The Other Giving Tree. It featured two trees next to each other and a boy growing up. One tree acted like the one in The Giving Tree, ending up as a stump, while the other tree stopped at giving the boy apples, and does not give the boy its branches or trunk. At the end of the story, the stump was sad that the old man chose to sit under the shade of the other tree. The Giving Tree band took its name from the book. Plain White TZP Should Have Gone to Bed has a song, The Giving Tree, written by Tim Lopez. The 2010 short film I'm Here, written and directed by Spike Jonze, is based on The Giving Tree. The main character Sheldon is named after Shel Silverstein. Where the Wild Things Are is a 1963 children's picture book by American writer and illustrator Maurice Sendak, originally published by Harper & Row. The book has been adapted into other media several times, including an animated short in 1974, with an updated version in 1988, a 1980 opera, and a live-action 2009 feature film adaptation, directed by Spike Jonze. The book had sold over 19 million copies worldwide as of 2009, with 10 million of those being in the United States. Sendak won the annual Caldecott Medal from the Children's Librarians in 1964, recognizing Wild Things as the previous year's most distinguished American picture book for children. It was voted the #1 picture book in a 2012 survey of school library journal readers. Not for the first time, this story of only 338 words focuses on a young boy named Max who, after dressing in his wolf costume, wreaks such havoc throughout his household that he is sent to bed without his supper. Max's bedroom undergoes a mysterious transformation into a jungle environment, and he winds up sailing to an island and inhabited by malicious beasts known as the Wild Things. After successfully intimidating the creatures, Max is hailed as the king of the Wild Things and enjoys a playful romp with his subjects. However, he starts to feel lonely and decides to return home, to the Wild Things' dismay. Upon returning to his bedroom, Max discovers a hot supper waiting for him. Monsieur Sendak began his career as an illustrator, but by the mid-1950s he had decided to start both writing and illustrating his own books. In 1956, he published his first book for which he was the sole author, Kenny's Window. 1956. Soon after, he began work on another solo effort. The story was supposed to be that of a child who, after a tantrum, is punished in his room and decides to escape to the place that gives the book its title, the Land of Wild Horses. Shortly before starting the illustrations, Sendak realized he did not know how to draw horses and, at the suggestion of his editor, changed the wild horses to the more ambiguous Wild Things, a term inspired by the Yiddish expression Wildtiere, wild animals, used to indicate boisterous children. He replaced the horses with caricatures of his aunts and uncles, caricatures that he had originally drawn in his youth as an escape from their chaotic weekly visits on Sunday afternoons to his family's Brooklyn home. Sendak, as a child, had observed his relatives as being all crazy faces and wild eyes, with blood-stained eyes and big and yellow teeth, who pinched his cheeks until they were red. These relatives, like Sendak's parents, were poor Jewish immigrants from Poland, whose remaining family in Europe were killed during the Holocaust while Sendak was in his early teens. As a child, however, he saw them only as grotesques. When working on the 1983 opera adaptation of the book with Oliver Knussen, Sendak gave the monsters the names of his relatives: Zippy, Moishi, Aaron, Emil, and Bernard. According to Sendak, at first, the book was banned in libraries and received negative reviews. It took about 2 years for librarians and teachers to realize that children were flocking to the book, checking it out over and over again, and for critics to relax their views. Since then, it has received high critical acclaim. Sir Francis Spufford suggests that the book is one of the very few picture books to make an entirely deliberate and beautiful use of the psychoanalytic story of anger. Mary Poles of Time magazine wrote that what makes Sendak's book so compelling is its grounding effect. Max has a tantrum and in a flight of fancy visits his wild side, but he is pulled back by a belief in parental love to a supper still hot, balancing the seesaw of fear and comfort. New York Times film critic Manohla Dargis noted that there are different ways to read The Wild Things, through a Freudian or colonialist prism, and probably as many ways to ruin this delicate story of a solitary child liberated by his imagination. In Selma G. Lanes's book The Art of Maurice Sendak, Sendak discusses where the wild things are along with his other books In the Night Kitchen and Outside Over. There's a sort of trilogy centered on children's growth, survival, change, and fury. He indicated that the 3 books are all variations on the same theme: how children master various feelings, danger, boredom, fear, frustration, jealousy, and manage to come to grips with the realities of their lives. Based on a 2007 online poll, the National Education Association named the book one of its teachers' top 100 books for children. 5 years later, School Library Journal sponsored a survey of readers which identified where The Wild Things are his top picture book. Elizabeth Bird, The NYPL librarian who conducted the survey observed that there was little doubt it would be voted number one and highlighted its designation by one reader as a watershed, ushering in the modern age of picture books. Another called it perfectly crafted, perfectly illustrated, simply the epitome of a picture book, and noted that Sendak rises above the rest in part because he is subversive. President Barack Obama has read it aloud for children attending the White House Easter egg roll-in multiple years. Despite the book's popularity, Sendak refused to produce a sequel. 4 months before his death in 2012, he told comedian Stephen Colbert that one would be the most boring idea imaginable, an animated short based on the book, which had taken 5 years to complete, was released in 1973, directed by Gene Deitch and produced at Kratky Film, Prague, for Weston Wood Studios. 2 versions were released. The original 1973 version, with narration by Alan Swift and a musique concrète score composed by Deitch himself, and an updated version in 1988 with new music and narration by Peter Schickele. In the 1980s, Sendak worked with British composer Oliver Knussen on a children's opera based on the book. The opera received its first incomplete performance in Brussels in 1980. The first complete performance of the final version was given by the Glyndebourne Touring Opera in London in 1984. This was followed by its first U.S. performance in St. Paul, Minnesota, in 1985, and the New York City premiere by New York City Opera in 1987. A concert performance was given at the Proms in the Royal Albert Hall in London in 2002. A concert production was produced by New York City Opera in spring 2011. In 1983, Walt Disney Productions conducted a series of tests of computer-generated imagery created by Glenn Keane and John Lasseter using as their subject Where the Wild Things Are. In 1999, Lasseter released a solo piano musical composition titled Where the Wild Things Are, which appeared on his album Active Imagination. Inspired by the Sendak book, the composition was revisited and re-recorded in 2012 on Lasseter's album Reconstructed, with Grammy winner and founder of Windham Hill Records, William Ackerman, producing. The 2005 Simpsons episode, The Girl Who Slept Too Little, features a spoof of Where the Wild Things Are entitled The Land of the Wild Beasts. The live-action film version of the book is directed by Spike Jonze. It was released on October 16, 2009. The film stars Max Records as Max and features Catherine Keener as his mother, with Lauren Ambrose, Chris Cooper, Paul Dano, James Gandolfini, Catherine O'Hara and Forrest Whitaker providing the voices of the principal wild things. The soundtrack was written and produced by Karen O and Carter Burwell. The screenplay was adapted by Jonze and Dave Eggers. Sendak was one of the producers for the film this year. The screenplay was novelized by Eggers as The Wild Things, published in 2009. In 2012, indie rock quartet Alche released the song Breeze Blocks, inspired in part by the book. Alche keyboardist Gus Unger Hamilton said the story and the song share similar ideas about parting with a loved one. Breeze Blocks reached certified ARIA Gold status in Australia in 2016. Alessia Cara released her second single, Wild Things, which charted at number 50 on the Billboard Hot 100. In an interview with ABC News Radio, Cara stated she took inspiration from Where the Wild Things Are, saying, "Each thing represents